This week we're going to look at some fundamental concepts in computer programming, and we're going to see how they relate to the Android development environment. So far, we've been making a GPS screen that looks somewhat similar to the one we've developed here on the live plant places. What it will do is we can send in a GPS. If I go to the DDMS here, I can send in a GPS setting. One moment. And let's see, we'll go ahead and send this. Okay. And we see that the GPS will appear on the GPS a plant screen. Then I can hit select plant, and this will take me to the search screen. So when I hit select plant, I will get a screen with an autocomplete text where I can type something like ABs, and then I can scroll down. This comes off screen, so let me bring it up, and I can hit search. Now here's where things differ between where we've left off and where we're going today. So far, when I've hit search on our app that we're building, it takes us right back to the GPS screen. But watch this. On the Real Plant Places app, when I hit search, what it's going to do is it's going to give me a list, a live list of plants with different attributes. So we'll see things like genus, species, common name. Genus, species, cultivar, common name. So cultivar is something like a Fuji apple or a Red Delicious apple, something like that. So we see a list of plants, and I can click on this, and then it's going to take me back to the GPS screen where I can say, okay, I found this plant somewhere. Now I wish to save some details with this plant, say maybe Sharon Woods. I was out there this morning GPSing some plants. And then description of the plant, maybe a native grove. And then I can hit save to phone, okay? And then it will appear in my list of plants that I have on my phone. So that's one option. But we know that we can also reuse this screen. That's one thing we're going to work on this week. Another thing is we can reuse this screen. If I choose menu, it'll take a moment, and then my menu will pop up. And I'm going to go to, say, main menu. So we'll go back to that very starting page. So plant search is useful if you are GPSing a plant, but maybe you want to see details about a plant. So right here from the home screen, I can choose Advanced Plant Search. And we're going to see I'm going to end up on that very same page, the very same search page, okay? And in this case, what I might do, instead of specifying a name, I might say Features. And if I click on features, it will expand the features, and we can see native and edible. That's something very popular, searching for native and edible plants. And then I hit search. Okay, and this is going to give me back a list of native and edible plants. Now, what are some things that we need to know? I'll go ahead and click on Common Pawpaw. We'll see the navigation here is going to be a little bit different. Instead of returning to a screen, it's actually going to take us to the Plant Places website in a manner that's formatted for mobile. But nonetheless, it's going to take us to the Plant Places website. So, and it's going to tell us details about that pawpaw that I clicked on. So, what are some things we need to know? First of all, we're getting more complex data types here. Instead of simply having just a plant name, we're actually getting multiple pieces of information about a plant. The genus, species, cultivar name, and common name. Those are some things that we're getting. We're also getting details like, is it edible? Is it native? Is it native to Cincinnati? So those are things that we're going to have to consider. How do we organize data when we have a lot of data about one item, or a lot of data about several items? How do we organize that? That's one thing that we're going to need to consider. Also, we need to consider how to show multiple pieces of information and allow the user to click on one. Also, we need to take a look at this WebView here and see how we can embed a web view into our app. Okay, so how can we show the user some web functionality but still be within our app so that I can hit the back button and I can go back to a previous page? And there we go, I'm back to the plant results. I hit back again, I go back to advanced search, and then if I hit back again, I will go back to the main menu. So how do we embed a web view within our app? Also, we're going to want to look at other things like networking and threading. How do we do this all efficiently and make it easy for the user to navigate our app without having to wait too long? Let the app be very responsive. So that's what we're going to start mimicking a bit this week. And in doing this, we're going to talk about some fundamental programming concepts. Let's remember where we left off on the mobile app that we've been making so far. This is our app, and we know what it's going to do is right now it has two screens. It has a little, well, let's see, it looks like I'm one screen in. 1 second, please. Okay, it has a bit of a mock-up of a GPS screen, and then it has our find specimen, which is kind of like our search button. Okay, and then it goes from there, it goes to our search screen, which we could probably add a few more fields. Okay, if I type in Asimina, okay, if I hit search, we should see search results, but right now what it's doing is it's actually just taking us back to our original page. So this is what we need to start working on. So if we see, let me expand this, I'm in the debugger now, and again, if you're new to programming or if you're an experienced programming, one of the biggest favors you can do for yourself is get very comfortable with the debugger. That will save you a lot of time. So this is the button, this is the method that is invoked when our search button is clicked. And we're simply going to get the text that the user entered, and I choose F6 to execute that line. I can mouse over this variable, and I see sure enough the user has entered the word Asimina, A-S-I-M-I-N-A, which is the genus for the pawpaw. Okay, and then what we're doing is we're simply returning some data back to the calling screen. This is where we want to change some things. I'll go ahead and choose play and let that play through. Instead of returning to the calling screen, we want to go to a new screen that's going to show us a list of matching results. Okay. Now in the Plant Places mobile, you remember there was a black screen that had a list of different ABS plants. So it had, you know, probably about 15 or so different plants. We could click on one and we could go to a web view. That's something that we can start looking at. That's what's called a list activity, and that's going to show us a list of information. Okay, but first, before we get to that, let's think about how we want to organize our information. Okay, so far what we've done is we've just been passing strings. Let's see, that's okay, 1 second. I'm going to switch views here to make it a little bit easier. Okay, if I go to our application that we have now, I go to FS131046 Plant Places, and I'm going to hit Source. Okay, if we look on Location Finder, and let me Control M so that we can see all of this, we'll see what we did is we just used a start activity for result, and we told it to invoke the search screen. Now if we go to the search screen, Plant Search Activity, if we go to the search screen, we see that we're gathering some text. Let's see, on activity result, there we go. Or is it on search click, that's it. We see that we're just gathering some text and we're putting it into the intent as an extra. Okay, now that's just text, and that text happens to be whatever name the user put into the search screen. Just happens to be whatever name the user put into the search screen. Now, if we think about everything that describes a plant, we have the genus, species, cultivar, and common name. Those are 4 pieces of information. We also have things like the maximum height, minimum height, the range of height that it would be in, native, edible, recommended, does it have winter interest? So when we start looking at all of the details that describe a plant, we see it would be a lot of stuff to push through as one string. Okay, so what we really need is a way to take all the things that describe a plant and kind of put them together in an envelope. That's what we really need. Okay, and if you remember all the way back to our first week, we talked about what a class is. And a class is a noun. This noun has attributes. Attributes are adjectives that describe a noun, okay? And then methods are verbs. Methods are things that that class does. So what we want to do now is we want to make a class that describes a plant, okay? So I'm going to choose Control M, and I'm also going to make a new folder. So when you see com.plantplaces.ui, that's kind of like a folder. And if you think about a folder on your computer, how many folders do you have? Probably several thousand. You use folders to organize things. The same goes in programming. You wouldn't want absolutely everything on your computer to be in one folder. Okay, you want to have folders, right? You wouldn't want to have everything right out at the C drive or anything like that, right? So we want to organize things in folders. In the Java programming language, this is what we would call a package. So I'm going to right-click on Source, and I'm going to choose New Package, and we will keep the first two items the same, the com.plantplaces. We'll keep that the same as what we have now. I'm going to add another period and then the letters DTO, which stand for Data Transfer Object. It means this is an object that holds data. Okay, this is a class that holds data. They will go into this folder. Any classes that hold data go into this folder. So I choose Finish. And now I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose New Class. Okay, and I will call this class, I'll call it Plant. It doesn't need to extend anything. It's what we call a plain old Java object, or a POJO. And then I'm going to choose Finish. Okay. So here we have an empty construction. I'll Control M so we can focus on this, called plant. So plant is a noun. Okay. And I'll put some comments up here that say hold data in one place that describe a plant. Okay. Okay, so this is a class. Okay, now what we need to do is define attributes that describe a plant. Sorry, a plant. Okay, so what do we have? Well, we have the concept of a genus, and that would be a string. In other words, character and metadata within quotes. So I'll say string genus. Okay, and then we have species. Okay, so Acer rubrum, a red maple. The genus is Acer. The species is rubrum. Okay, so then we have string cultivar and string common. Again, these are all names that will describe our plant. Okay, then we might have something called a Boolean. A Boolean is something that's either true or false. Is it native? Okay, Boolean. Is it edible? Does it have edible parts? Boolean. Is it recommended? Native is a key word. I have to change it to native plant. Well, let's say native to Ohio. How about that? There we go. That's just a special word I can't make any use of. So there we go. We now have things that will describe a plant. Now, we typically don't like to access these things directly, so I need to make some methods that will access these attributes, but it's very easy to do. What I can do is I can right-click, refactor, and choose, actually let's do it a different way. Let's right-click in Source and choose Generate Getters and Setters. Okay. And then I'm going to say Select All. And access modifier public is fine. I think we're good. After recommended and OK. This generates a bunch of methods that kind of give us a bit of access control for these variables, so we can figure out who is accessing these variables. So with that, I now have a plant set up. Okay, and we're going to see that having all of this information together in one class or one data type is going to make things a lot easier for us in the long run. It's going to make it easier for us to do things like see a list of plants that match search results. Now there is one more thing that we need. Because we have a kind of complex object, we need a way to show a summary of what it is. And the way we do that is by implementing a method called toString. Now this is easy to do. This is a method that's very common. So we'll just type in TO and a capital S, hold Control and hit space, and then choose Enter. And that will give us our toString method. We can go ahead and gut what's inside. We're not going to need that. Now, notice that this method, if we remember what a method signature is, we have access modifier, we have return type, we have method name, and then we have parameter list. Because this method signature has a return type of string, we have to return a string. Otherwise, we'll get a red line and it will not compile. So I'm going to choose return. If I just said empty string, that would be enough to get me to compile. Remember, if you have a red line, objective number 1, get rid of the red line, get it to compile. Okay. Now, another option is I can use these strings up here. Genus, species, cultivar, common. So what I can do is say return genus, and then the plus symbol will append two strings together. So I can say genus and then a space, and then double quote, space, double quote, then a space, then another plus, then species, and then a space, and then a plus, and then double quote with a space in between, another space, cultivar, and again, repeat this pattern. The reason for the double quotes is it just gives us the space between each of these terms. And then finally, common. Okay. And so now I've satisfied my toString method. And what that will do is that is just a summary of what we have in this class called plant. And I choose save. Okay. So now I have a complex type called plant. This is going to be a nice little envelope that I can put all of my plant information in. The next thing I want to do is figure out how I'm going to display a list of plants. And what I need to do for that is I need to go back to com.plantplaces.ui, right click, and then I'll choose new, and then I'll choose class. Okay. Now if you remember on the Plant Places app, we searched and we came up with a list of plants. We can do that very easily, but we need something just a little bit special for that. I'm going to give it a name. We'll say Plant Results, and the superclass is what's important. I'm sorry, let me call it Plant Results Activity. How about that? That'll be a little more descriptive. Okay, the superclass is what's important. Now, this looks a bit confusing. This page we're looking at, this form we're looking at, looks a bit confusing. It baffled me for the longest time. Just follow these steps. Click on Browse, and then once again we get another screen that looks equally confusing. Now type ListActivity. Okay, and hit Enter, and then choose Finish. When you do this, you get a very special activity that's meant for returning a list of data. It's really quite nice. And I choose Finish. Okay, and here we go. Okay, so I will Control M so that I can put some documentation on what we're trying to do. Okay, I'm going to say return display a list of plants that the user can see and select, for lack of any other word, and save, and Control M. Okay, there we go. What's interesting about a list activity is it knows it's displaying a list of results. It knows it's displaying a list of results. And so we don't have to give it a layout. We don't have to make a layout for this. It already has a layout that's built in. Okay. We do need to register it in the Android manifest. So after I save, I'm going to go to Android manifest, and I'll Control M as soon as this appears. Okay, I'll click on the application tab, and again, this gets really hard unless we actually Control M it. It's really hard to see everything. So I Control M, and I'm going to scroll down, and we know we have to register all of our activities here, and our Plant Results activity is no exception. So I choose Add, and I choose Activity, and I choose OK. And we get a little tiny area down here to the right where we can specify which activity we're registering. And so I want to register the Plant Results activity. If I don't see it, I can just start typing Plant Results activity, and there we go. And then I choose Save. Now if we take a look at the XML that was generated, it simply added an activity tag. As we saw last week, we could add some intent filters to it if we want, or any other descriptors like that. But so far I think we see what's going on. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to Control M this so I can take a look at source. And one thing I definitely want to change is on the plant search activity, okay, a Control M so we can see this. Instead of just returning back to the calling method, I'm going to change this a little bit. Instead of intent equals get intent, we're going to take this out and we're going to say navigate to the plant results screen, okay? And I'll say intent equals new intent, and we'll make this an explicit intent, so we'll pass a copy of the current object, and then we're going to say plant results activity.class. Okay. Everything else will stay the same. Let me terminate the let me disconnect the debugger. I don't need to call finish anymore, and I don't need to call set result. So I'm sorry, not everything stays the same. Actually, let me go ahead and clean up this whole method because we're getting a bit of clutter here. Okay. And we'll go back and we'll rearrange that in a bit. So what we'll do now is we'll say start activity for result and then intent. And there we go. Oh, I'm sorry. We need to give it a code, don't we? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's just for now. Let's see. We need to give it start activity for result. We need intent, comma 200. Is that the order? Did I get the order? I got the order right. We need just some unique number. So I'm gonna give it the number 2. I'm gonna hold Control and hit 1. Extract to constant. Let's make this. Let's make a constant out of this that better describes what it is, and we will say plant underscore results. Okay, there we go. Okay, that's fine. So start activity for result. We're putting in a variable that's set to the number 2, so that when we get data back from this, we will know what we called. Okay, when we get data back from this intent, we'll know which intent it was that we called. So, okay, start the plant results intent. Okay, I think we got it. So I'm going to choose save, and we're not expecting anything to come up yet because we have not yet populated this, but let's just make sure we're on the right path. I'm just going to do a little checkpoint. I know that right now everything is compiling, which is good. So I'm going to choose debug as Android application, and if all works well, this should refresh and debug. We'll give that just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and select the running emulator, which will save me a whole lot of time over pulling up a new emulator. And we have it. So I'm going to choose Find Specimen. That should take me to my search screen. Okay, I'll type in something like Asimina, or just some letters. It doesn't really matter right now. And then I'm going to hit search, and this will probably take us to a blank screen, or you know what, it might even give us an error here because I didn't put anything in it. Let's see, we'll go ahead and choose play. And this screen that it's going to take us to will be the screen that shows us plant results. Okay, nothing there yet because we haven't told it anything to display. So our next step then is to give this a list of results that will display. Now we have this concept of a plant, and to display something in our list we need to show multiple plants. So we need a collection of plants. So what I'm going to do is go into the plant results activity, and we're not going to deal with live data just yet. We eventually will, but for the moment we're going to deal with just some dummied up data. This is an activity, and we know the magic thing we need to do in any activity is override the onCreate method. Okay, so I'm going to say on C, and then hold Control and hit space. And there are a lot of options that come up, so I'll start typing create so I can narrow it down. The first option is the one that I want. Okay, we'll leave the super call in there, that's fine. And next what we need to do is create a plant. Well, actually, let's say create a collection of plants. as results. Okay, so first of all, a collection. If we have more than one item of the same type, we can put it in something called an array list. Capital A, R-R-A-Y-L-I-S-T. And what we'll need to do is we'll need to tell it what we're storing in that array list. So I do less than symbol, plant, greater than symbol. So this is a collection of multiple pieces of information. I'm going to need to give it a name. This is a variable I'm declaring. I need to give it a name. Let's say all plants. And then I need to put an equal sign, and I need to assign something to this variable. So what I'll do is I'll say new array list plant, like so. Open and close paren, and then semicolon. We have a lot of different symbols going on here. First, let me Control-Shift-O to organize imports. So we declare a variable called allPlants, and this is a variable of type ArrayList, but specifically an array list that will hold plant objects, or plants in other words. And then on the right, we have the constructor, where we are reserving space in memory for this array list. So on the left, a variable, a place in memory. On the right, we're creating an object of type ArrayList, and we're storing that into this variable called allPlants. It's hard to explain, and it's a lot of words, but basically what we're doing, creating a new ArrayList on the right, storing it into the variable on the left of the equal sign. And that's why this equal sign is called the assignment operator. It does whatever's on the right, takes the results of that, and stores it into the variable on the left. Now the next step is we need to create some plants and put them in this array list. So we do a similar thing when we create a plant. Create a plant. I'm going to say plant, let's say pawpaw, equals new plant. So on the right, we're constructing what we call a new object of type plant. On the left, we're creating a new variable or a new space in memory, and we're putting the plant object on the right into the variable on the left. Once I have this object defined and the variable defined, I can start populating all of those attributes. And I'll populate the attributes defined in this class by using those methods that we generated automatically. So I'll say pawpaw.setGenus, Asimina. I'll put that in quotes because it's a string. Pawpaw.setSpecies, Triloba. Put that in quotes again because it's a string. Pawpaw.setCultivar. We might say Susquehanna. Okay. Put that in quotes because it's a string. Pawpaw.setCommon. Guess what? We'll say common pawpaw. Or actually, I can just say pawpaw to be honest with you. Okay, there we go. And now what we're going to say is, since we've created this plant, add it to the collection of plants. Okay. For that, it's as easy as this. Allplants.add pawpaw. There we go. Let's make one more. Let's make one more plant. Make one more plant. Okay. Plant redbud equals new plant. Okay. So now we have a different object. A redbud is a kind of tree just like a pawpaw. So they're both plants, and they both have a genus, species, cultivar, and common name, but the values are different for that genus, species, cultivar, and common name. So I'm going to say redbud.setGenus. I could do these in any order, but this is typically a natural order. Cercis, and then redbud.setSpecies, Canadensis, redbud.setCultivar. No, we won't. Well, okay, that's fine. We can do a cultivar. Lavender twist. I might have misspelled lavender there. Lavendar or lavender, I don't remember. Redbud.setCommon. Redbud. Now, the variable name doesn't have to be the common name. I just chose a name I would remember, Pawpaw and Redbud. We could call this plant 1 and plant 2 for all that matters, but typically it's a good idea to give it a name that is descriptive of what it is. Okay? Add the Redbud to the collection. Okay? All plants.add Redbud. Okay. Next, we need to associate this collection with the list of results. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. It's just a matter of some kind of interesting syntax that we have to use, but it's kind of confusing unless you know what you're doing. Okay? So this will be 2 lines. The first thing we need is something called an array adapter. And just like our array list, we need to tell it what it is holding. And we need to say it's holding plant, which is that complex type that we just made. So array adapter plant, let's say plant adapter equals new array adapter plant. I'll warn you, this line's going to get a little bit long. So inside of this, we have to pass arguments to a constructor. Let me Control-Shift-O, organize imports to get rid of our red lines. So we have a constructor call here. A constructor is something that creates or constructs an object. We've seen several of those so far. New plant here, new plant here, new array list plant here. That's what's called a constructor. The ones we've had so far, we haven't passed anything in. This one now, we're going to need to pass something in. First, we're going to need to pass in a reference to the current object. There we go. Now we need to pass in a constant, and it's strange. It's a strange worded constant, but it just says how to display our items. So we'll say android.r.layout.simple list item 1. What does that mean? Don't worry too much about it. If you're in a situation where you need to create a list of items, just pretty much follow this line by line. Finally, we need to put in the collection that we wish to display, which is all plants. So all plants. And then terminate with the semicolon. So a reference to the current object, an identifier that says how we want to display things, and then the collection that we want to display. And by the way, when I say current object, I mean this plant results activity, what we're in right now. Let me just disconnect from the debugger. Finally, what we need to do is we need to marry together our collection and the UI that the user sees. Okay? So we will say set layout is what we want. Set list adapter, and then plants adapter. And there we go. And terminate with a semicolon. And I'll save. Okay. So I am going to run this once just to make sure we did everything correctly. And then after that, we will take a look at in the debugger. As a matter of fact, there are a couple more things I want to do. I'm going to go ahead and make a constructor for the plant. So I'll say public plant, okay, and I'll just say, put a comment here that says this constructs our plant, okay. Whoops. I don't like putting in print statements, but in this case I'm putting one in just so we can set a breakpoint and watch what happens here. But that way when we create a plant object, we'll be able to watch it getting constructed. Okay, I'm going to Control M, and now I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose Debug again. That will give us one chance to run through it, and then another chance to actually watch it as we watch in the debugger. I've left my emulator up, which is always a good idea because it will load much faster that way. The app will load much faster. So I'm going to select the emulator and choose OK. And if all works well, we should see our app come up right here. And here we go. So I choose Find Specimen. And again, this is all dummy data so far. Go ahead and choose Find Specimen. It will render the search screen. I'll put any text, it doesn't matter, but I can go ahead and put Asimina. and then search, and now this should show us, with any luck, go ahead and choose play. This should show us the 2 plants that we created. Okay, plant constructed, plant constructed. This should show us the 2 plants that we created in a list. And there we go. You see, it shows us those 2 plants that we created, the Susquehanna pawpaw and the lavender twist redbud. Now remember, we made a class called plant to hold all of this data. And now what we're seeing is 2 unique plants displayed in a list. So we had to know how to make a complex class called a plant. We had to know how to put that into an array list, and we had to know how to associate that array list with our view. So the next thing we need to do is figure out, where do we go next? We'll save that for a future discussion, but I do want to go ahead and run this through the debugger. I'm going to just go back a screen, see if it'll let me do that okay. I haven't finished all the wiring up. There we go. And now, in our plant result activity, the activity we just made with the onCreate, okay, I'm going to snap a breakpoint here, and let's watch what happens. Let's watch very closely what happens. So right now I'm in the search screen. I choose search. What do we do in the search screen? We are going to gather the plant name that the user entered, create a new intent for our results activity. That's an explicit intent. Put the plant name that the user entered, and then we're going to say, start this activity and tell me what the user picked. So I choose F6, and then I'm going to choose play, which is off the screen. Okay, now take a look. We're in the plant results activity, and you can see it's starting to render in the emulator. Okay, so we're in the plant results activity. The first thing we're doing is we're making a collection of plants. Once again, if you're new to programming, I strongly recommend getting very fluent with the debugger. This will be a lifesaver for you. I'm going to expand this a little bit, and what you can see is we have a variables window up at the top, and it will show us what is currently in this collection. Right now there's nothing in the collection, okay? But watch this. I say pawpaw, plant pawpaw equals new plant. I'm going to F5 into that, step into that, and we'll see that that is calling this constructor, okay? Constructor creates an object out of a class. So a class just defines the attributes. An object gives attributes values. If you remember the video I had you watch early on this semester, we talked about the difference between a class and an object. A class is something that defines attributes, and an object will put value to those attributes. Okay, so I'll go ahead. I'm going to take off this breakpoint because it's going to stop quite frequently. So I'll go ahead and take this breakpoint off. And now I'm going to just step over and back. And now what we're going to do is we're going to populate each of our attributes or each of our variables of pawpaw one at a time. And then finally we're going to add that pawpaw to our collection. So take a look up here. Let me Control M so we can see this a little bit better. In the debugger, what we see is we have this all plants collection, and if I expand, we'll see in element 0, the first element, we have our pawpaw. What we're about to do is populate that second element with our redbud. So in the first element we have our pawpaw, and in a moment we'll have an element here in position 1. You might wonder why we start with 0. In programming, we always start with 0. We always start counting with 0 because the idea is the world begins at 0 because there are all the fractional numbers between 0 and 1. So our first element is actually element 0, and that holds our pawpaw. Our redbud will be in element number 1. Okay, I Control M so I can go back to the windowed view, and we see now it's going to create a redbud, and it's going to set the genus, species, cultivar, and common. And then the important part, it's going to add it to the collection of plants. So once again, if I go to the variables view, Control M to expand on that so we can see it, take a look. We have a collection of plants. In location 0, we have our pawpaw. In location 1, we now have our redbud. Okay, so now we have 2 plants in this collection, a pawpaw and a redbud. Okay, and if it's easier to see, you can just see the output down here in this window down below. So I Control M to take us back, And now we're simply wiring up to the view. So I'll go ahead and hit play. We'll come back to our view, and what we'll see is it has populated 2 of our plants. This is really important. The concept of classes and objects is very important and very central to object-oriented programming. I've avoided talking a whole lot about it specifically so far in our class, just because this class is meant for people who don't have a programming background, and I wanted to do things that would show results pretty early. But we've been dealing with classes and objects and methods all along. If you think about some of the classes we've dealt with activity, location finder, plant search activity, plant results activity. Each of those is a class. You can think about some of the methods that we've dealt with so far. We've dealt with onCreate, onPause, onResume, dealt with a lot of different methods. So some of the variables we've dealt with so far, we now have our red bud and our pawpaw, but we've also dealt with string variables in the past. So now we get to tie a little bit of this together. To get any good discussion of programming and good programming on any device, including an Android device or any other device, we really have to think a lot about this concept of classes and object-oriented programming. And now you're getting a hands-on example of what classes and object-oriented programming are. So, things we've learned so far today, we learned about this special thing called a list activity. We know we have to populate it with an array adapter, and then we take that array adapter and we pass it to set list adapter. We know what an array list is. An array list can hold a collection of data of the same type. And we know how to make our own class now. And we made one called plant. We set up some attributes that will describe it. And then we have some methods that will allow us to change those attributes and read those attributes. We also made this convenience method called toString, and that is what gets called when this list gets created. So it's a user-friendly representation of our object. We know that a class is this thing. It defines attributes. A class defines attributes. We know that an object is what happens when we call a constructor like we have here, and then by using these methods called setter methods, we put values to those attributes. So a class is simply a definition of attributes, and then an object puts values to those attributes. So that's a pretty good discussion so far. Things that are coming up next, we'll take a look at the WebView and how we can view one of these plants in the WebView. And also we're going to take a look at refactoring a little bit, making things look a little bit better. And we're going to take a look at menus. So those are things coming up. Thank you.